Hey guys, welcome back to another Spy Family Sunday. It feels great to be back. We are finally here to discuss chapter 99 of the manga, and this was a pretty somber chapter, I'm not gonna lie. But we knew that things were not really gonna get better, considering we're in the middle of a war. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this, because a lot happened. This is a pretty long chapter. Once again, if you guys are new to the channel or you're returning and you're liking the content, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. So the chapter starts off right where we left off. The end of graduation dance was ruined by, something's happening where students are running, like run to the shelters. Some of the teachers are saying Henry and Martha are sort of jolted out of the moment they're having. Henry tells Martha like, hey, snap out of it, we gotta run. It turns out to be a false alarm. The teachers are like, it's a false alarm, but we feel like this is an appropriate time to sort of end the school dance. Some of the students are upset about this, but the teachers are like, hey, just be lucky that this wasn't a real crisis. Martha and Henry are sort of chatting amongst the chaos, and Henry's like, hey, was there something that you wanted to tell me? Martha sort of retreats from the question, and so she's like, no, it wasn't anything important. I really just wanted to get well wishes from you. And so they exchange pleasantries, and Henry wishes her all the best of luck. She's joining the auxiliary force in the war. In the background of her mind, she's thinking, I really regretted not telling him how I felt in that moment. And so we flash to Martha crying at her home. I think her grandmother is like, oh dear, like what is wrong, and she's like, here, your uncle sent a letter to his dear niece from the battlefield, and apparently her uncle's name is Miguel, which is interesting. And so she's reading the letter, and she has like a eureka moment. She's like, a letter, I'll write him a letter. And so she's in her barracks with like one of her trainee friends, and she's like, oh, I'll write him a letter. And she's like, my dearest Henry, and she's like, oh no, I can't say that. And she crumples up the paper, and her friend is asking her like, hey, who are you writing to? And she's like, none of your business, I'm not gonna tell you. And so she writes Henry like a really sweet letter, like, I'm scheduled to leave on the 20th, and it would be really great if I could see you before I go. Unfortunately, one of her COs sees the letter, and he's like, redact all of what's in this letter. Like, we're in the middle of a war, we got spies everywhere. Can't believe she would write all of this in a letter. And so she's at the train station getting ready to leave. Henry doesn't show up because A, most of the letter was redacted, and he gets it after the fact. Obviously, Martha doesn't know any of this. She's upset, but she has to go. Henry eventually gets the letter, and he's sort of reading through it, and he's like, how can I figure out what this says with most of the writing being redacted? Martha's like, hey, I'm writing to you from someplace far away from Berlin. Apparently I wasn't supposed to put everything in there that I wanted to tell you. My CO was really mad, and I just wanted to write you because I didn't want you to be lonely. And of course Henry's like, oh, well, that's very presumptive of you. He's thinking to himself, and he proceeds to write her back. Martha gets the letter, and she's like, oh my god, he wrote me back, and one of the girls is like, oh, is that your lover? And Martha sort of gets down in the dumps because Henry's basically lecturing her the whole time. Her friend is like, ah, so it's one-sided, have you told him how you felt? And she's like, no, but I will try to. And so basically Martha's job within the war is to, I'm guessing, auxiliary, so interpreting codes, sending messages. She's basically typing all day. Henry and Martha are exchanging letters throughout the scope of the war. Martha's sort of reflecting on like what's going on with her in the war in like as much detail as she can. And so they sort of use the correspondence in lieu of their tea time when they used to meet up and talk. But as the war progresses, Henry notes that he's receiving less and less letters from Martha. And you get like this really haunting panel of like all of this destruction. In the background, you see bodies laying everywhere. And so this is like real world stuff. And so it's pretty frightening. And so Henry's sort of thinking to himself, like, man, it's been months since I've gotten a letter from Martha. He's starting to realize that he is yearning for these messages from her. Like, he wants to talk to her. And so his world is sort of diving more and more into politics, and he's at some kind of party, and he overhears some of the, I'm assuming, military generals talking about the women auxiliary group. And they're like, whoa, they've been trained in rudimentary combat, haven't they? And so also suggesting that they want the women to go to the front lines. And so we flash to a scene with a commander, and he's telling the women, hey, you know, we need y'all on the front lines. Talk to your families. I need a decision by tonight. Most of the women in the auxiliary force are like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to die. One of the girls is like, we don't have a choice. It's like deserters will be executed. So either we go and die on the front lines or we stay and we die here. And so Martha's like, look, if I'm going to die, then I'm at least going to go to the front lines and like try to take out some of our enemies. And so Henry, he reads a newspaper later on and he sees a picture of Martha and her friends in combat attire. They have helmets, they have guns, and you know, the caption on the paper just says, much praise for the brave, loyal women who are out here on the front lines. Henry is like really distracted by this in class. You know, his students are like, hey, the debate's about to start. And he's like, okay, I'll be there in a minute. And the cool thing about this chapter, it didn't even dawn on me, but apparently Donovan Desmond was a student of Mr. Henderson at one time, because we get a panel of him. And so Donovan, and it's crazy to see him as a child, but like Donovan is arguing how war will never end because human beings are liars. And you kind of get a feel for where his nihilism came from at like such an early, from such an early standpoint. Because Donovan like lived through the war. So like he's seen what human beings can do. And he basically argues how like even if the other side doesn't want to fight, we still have weapons and we don't know the intention of the people who are antagonizing this. His whole argument in the debate is basically about we will never fully understand the intentions of others and war is inevitable. It's really haunting because it's just like for a boy this young to have such fatalistic views of the world. It's just pretty scary, to be honest. It's like really scary. And so I'm very curious to see how his life was directly impacted by this war. I don't know how much longer this arc is going to be with Henry and Martha, but I'm locked in. They're having a debate about the war and Henry is thinking to himself, he's so distracted. He has no patience for any of this. He's sort of there, but he's not engaging. He's worried about Martha. He wants to know if Martha's okay. He hasn't gotten a letter from her. It flashes to a scene. He goes down to the mailroom and a lady down there is like, hey, you have a letter. He like immediately snatches it from her and he's reading it. Martha's not doing good. She's like, sorry, I haven't written you in a while. I haven't been well. I haven't been eating. I keep having the same nightmare. She tells Henry that, you know, you're teaching at the school and all of the students are holding hands around you and like, I can't join you because my hands are dirty. Obviously, Martha is suffering from some kind of PTSD. Like she has killed people on the battlefield and she doesn't know how to process it. Henry, in this moment, finally understands that he has feelings for Martha because he starts crying while he's reading the letter and all he wants to do is protect her, but he can't. You know, he writes her back and he says like, my beloved Martha. Essentially, he's confessing his feelings for her. You know, it's like one of those situations, it's like a little too late. And so he tells her to come back, but that's the last letter he ever receives from her. And he hears on the radio that even though the women have essentially succeeded, a majority of them have sacrificed their lives. And so Henry is just stricken by fear with this because he doesn't know if Martha is alive or dead. We flash back to Eden Academy and there's like a general or a commander talking to the youth and he's like, you are the future of Eden. You will, you know, forge a new path for our victory. And at this time, you know, Henry is just fed up with all of this. He's like, he's telling him to shut up and he's like, we're not going to sacrifice these children like for your propaganda. The military soldiers, you know, hit him over the face with a baton and they throw him in jail. His father comes to bail him out and he's like, look, you need to either drop these foolish ideals you have or you're never setting foot in a classroom again. And so Henry ultimately puts his pride aside so that he can continue teaching. He wants to encourage them and inspire them in ways that, you know, the military is not. He runs into Donovan again in the hallway point, and Donovan's like, oh, our class hasn't progressed very much while you were in jail. Henry apologizes for that, and Donovan straight up tells Mr. Henderson that he's a fool. He's like, excuse me for saying this, but you're a fool. And one shouldn't expect anything from those who, in their foolishness, have disappointed you once already. And like, that's a very important line because it proves that Donovan has little patience for people that disappoint him in some way. And Mr. Henderson is like, that's kind of a preposterous way to live because it suggests that Donovan has no room for forgiveness and everybody should be forgiven to some degree. It just further goes to prove how cold Donovan is. And so they're sort of having this back and forth. You know, Mr. Henderson is like, if we give up on everything that quickly, then that would be the end of human history. It's like, we have to try, we have to keep going. And Mr. Henderson is like, if we didn't have any history, then I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be able to teach you. And Donovan's like, well, I don't want that. You know, and he's like, I'll see you in class. And so obviously Donovan holds like this odd affection for Mr. Henderson. I don't know what it is, but he enjoys his class. Henry moves on with his life. His father's like, look, you've pretty much screwed up any chances with other suitors that I have found for you, but luckily one woman has agreed to marry you. This really is for the best. And so he marries this unknown woman, and the scene flashes to Martha. And she's laid up in bed. She has this bandage around her neck, so she's clearly been wounded. And it says that somewhere near the east-west border. We don't know who has rescued her, but there's fire in the background, sort of like crackling and popping. So she's somewhere that's cold. And so something has happened to her. We don't know where she is, but that's how the chapter ends. So, wow. A lot happened in this chapter. This chapter was full of regrets. It was full of the reality of what happens in war. It was just a really, really good chapter. Endo is so good at humanizing his characters, and I know that sounds weird, but he's really good at grounding the story. I know that a lot of people are missing Anya and Lloyd and Yor, but this is important material, especially now that we have this flashback with Donovan. I like seeing the mindset of Donovan. I like seeing how he was as a child, how the wheels are spinning in his mind. So I'm very curious as to see where this goes. I don't know if we're gonna jump in time to see like Donovan as he gets older and how his mindset either changes or doesn't change. I'm curious to see what happened to Martha. She was wounded somehow. Where is she? Who rescued her? You know, who is this woman that Henry decided to marry for the sake of his family? There's just a lot going on, but this was a great chapter, and I can't wait for chapter 100. I mean, we're almost to 100 chapters, guys. This is crazy. We are finally here. So I'm excited. And I feel like with chapter 100, I feel like Endo should really go out. Like this is a major milestone, and so I feel like the next chapter is going to be even better than this. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought about the chapter. Let me know about your theories for the next chapter, and until next time, remember to be awesome and stay true.